Did you know that you're weird? You're wonderfully weird. Join us for the next few minutes as Drake Hunter, senior pastor at Elevating Life Church in Fort Morgan, Colorado, and author of the upcoming book Wonderfully Weird, helps us to understand how to live that wonderfully weird life to the fullest every single moment of every day. I'm your host, John Waters. Now, Wonderfully Weird Living with pastor and author Drake Hunter. Well, Drake, here we go with the first episode of the brand new Wonderfully Weird Living podcast. I have to say I'm excited about the opportunities that are going to present themselves through this podcast. So first of all, I want to say thank you for taking your time to do this.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thank you for asking. I'm thrilled myself.
Well, let's talk about, in this podcast, let's look at your vision for what you're hoping to use this podcast to accomplish.
Well, just as you shared, I'm thrilled and excited to begin our new podcast series called The Wonderfully Weird Living. Now, it's a series that I will generally be looking at, or we will generally be looking at the wonderfully weird life, but specifically truly expanding on the Sunday morning message delivered the Sunday prior here at Elevating Life Church. Now, we're doing this to assist our church's life groups with having relevant, meaningful, and clear discussions revolving around the church's direction, perspective, direction, and attitude, all of that together, so that we can truly have a meaningful time together through these different life groups that we're having. And so that's the direction we're going with this podcast.
Well, so I've heard it said, and I think it was Pastor Rick Warren at Saddleback Church that said, the larger a church grows, the smaller it has to grow. And that's where life groups come in, and that's something that you and I both have been passionate about for a long time. And now we're beginning to see the start of those life groups and the buds of the fruit, if you will. And that's where this podcast now can be kind of that rallying point, maybe, where the different life groups can come together, and even though they're separate and different, still have kind of the same focus.
That's right on. As a church grows, the larger it becomes, the smaller we must become. And that's vital in growth. And it's interesting. Just yesterday I was at a wedding, and many people knew who I am. And through that, somebody mentioned that they did not want to grow bigger, which was interesting because I'm sitting there going, well, of course, that's not in our hands, that's in God's hands. But what he was saying was, we want to stay small because we enjoy that intimacy, that connection that we have, that we even see Jesus had with his 12. And so rather than just saying, hey, we're just going to stifle the growth that God wants for the church, what we're doing is making sure that we have that understanding, that view that we must get smaller through this new system that we're putting in place for the church with small groups, or life groups, I should say, so that we can grow larger and create a larger movement for Christ right here in Morgan County.
Absolutely. Well, of course, as you mentioned, these podcasts are meant to get deeper into what you've talked about the Sunday prior. The message this past Sunday, I'm sure a lot of people were probably very shocked by it. Friends in Low Places,
yes,
based upon the Garth Brooks song. And as we've been doing all year long, using classic rock and country songs to illustrate biblical truths. And so let's talk about this one a little bit. Friends in Low Places, and where you took that one on Sunday.
It was an interesting message for me to create, but through that prayer process and through just studying, the vision came to me that after listening to the song, which is very powerful, very popular, I thought to myself, we're nothing more than friends in low places, the places being, of course, here on earth and the different areas that we live. And then, of course, what is our responsibility as a friend to another neighbor, if you will, to truly help them along to connect in these low places so that we can truly reflect the glory of God. And that's where I started with this whole process, but at the same time, taking that message in the direction, of course, first and foremost, love. John 15:12-13 was the passage there. My command is this: love each other as I have loved you, Jesus said. And of course, truly understanding what love is, objectively speaking, is the direction I was going. So how can we be friends in low places where we can truly love one another in a benevolent way, meaning that we have the ability to truly set our interest aside and truly love our friends here on earth so that we can truly be a benefit to them as they're going through perhaps some challenges and different things in their life. And of course, Jesus said, greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life. And that's, again, benevolence. That's one's interest, one's preference. One thing that many of us have a difficult time doing because we believe that sacrifice is somehow being detached from our money or our stuff, which has nothing to do with what sacrificial living is. It has to do with sacrificing our preferences, our own interest in life. So went in that direction and shared a little illustration about the chicken and the pig. And of course, great little illustration when it comes to sacrificing, because the chicken gives a couple of eggs, where of course the pig gives it all by giving the bacon or sausage or ham, whatever that might be. So just a beautiful little picture to put in our mind to hopefully discern between really what being detached from the world means versus true sacrifice as a friend or as that Christian in this wonderfully weird life that we live.
I loved that juxtaposition you made there on Sunday morning.
That's right.
Between sacrifice and detaching. I think that was very powerful.
That actually wasn't in my notes. That's the Holy Spirit just kind of throwing it on me, and I'm like, I'm going to give this for whatever reason. It was just a perfect time and fit. And through that, if there was one time in that message that I've received a lot of feedback, it was with that particular, I'm not as up on those big words as you are, but on the contrast there, I know what it means. So
I just hope I used it right.
So yes, you did, contrast. So yes, and again, what a beautiful picture when it comes to true friendship in our different life roles, be it our spouse or family or whatever life role we may be in or in that place.
Now, as you're going through the message on Sunday morning and talking about that unconditional love for others, for our friends and for our family and such, but there does come a point in time where that changes a little bit, in that it becomes very toxic, correct?
It becomes toxic, and then it becomes dead in the sense of our own energy and our own direction. And oftentimes what happens is, rather than being discerning and being a peacemaker as a friend, if we don't properly follow the way, what happens, we turn into a people pleaser, and before we know it, we're caught up into perhaps some of the drama of that, or even being drawn into that lifestyle once again. And then what happens before we know it, without making a radical decision of really saying, hey, is it time to turn this over to the love of God, or that perfection of God, and allowing God to be God, because you have to at times kill the relationship and allow God to be God. And of course we see this in 2 Corinthians 6:14, where it says, don't team up with those who are unbelievers. And how can righteousness be a partner with wickedness, or how can light live with darkness? But isn't the challenging point, there's a point in the message I said, now the question is this, when do we make that decision? And of course, we know in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, the love chapter, the very end of that first chapter says there's three things that remain: love, faith, and hope. Or we should say, in order, faith. Yeah, I can get it.
Love.
There we go. Faith, love.
Faith, hope, and love.
I'll get it. Faith, hope, and love. Now, of course, as we're assessing this, trying to be good friends, at what point? Well, when hope is depleted. Now, notice faith still sits on one side and love on the other. But when that hope is gone, not the hope in your friend or even yourself or any of that, where you're only a limited human being. You only have so much knowledge, so much understanding, and you can no longer provide hope or have that anticipation that anything's going to change. So at that point, we have to kill the relationship as we see in the Old Testament and New Testament, and allow God to be God, who has the power to resurrect that dead relationship. And we have to truly step in that faith and allow God to be God again, if he so chooses to raise that relationship or whatever that might be to life again. Resurrection, Christ is the perfect picture of that.
Is that same true? You mentioned the scripture where it says believers not to be yoked with unbelievers. Mm-hmm. What about two believers, but one is in a place where it has become a very toxic type of relationship? Do we continue that relationship, or is that another place where we turn it over to God and we step away and allow God to work in it?
Yeah, toxic isn't really the issue here, is it? Going back to hope. When hope is gone, now, so hope is in the sense of intent. Now, we all fall into those toxic habits, toxic emotions, but then we have to also discern, let's say, intent, because oftentimes when we don't have the proper knowledge or understanding as a friend to the other, we're feeding information oftentimes subjectively, not giving objective knowledge. We're helping, but we're not. So what happens is rather this person's truly seeking help and truly going after it, but and they turn to their own traditions, their own history, and even their own understanding and their friends. And what happens is they continue just to kind of chase themselves. The intent's right, but for the wages of sin is death. Now, if the truth comes along, which I've done many times with our membership, with different relationships, and they see the truth, and then their intent is to go just the opposite. I'm going to stay in my ways. And then they become dead in that way. Then you have no other option but to kill that relationship. But that's going back to the Old Testament where God finally said, kill them all. Well, that wasn't easy by no means. In fact, we see this with Jesus Christ, right? On the cross, where in Jesus' death, at first glance, it seems God, who is Jesus' best friend, walks or turns away on that. And Jesus is completely emptied of his deity. That faith, hope, and love, he has to empty himself. God had to empty himself so that because he can have no sin or be part of that sin. There has to be a moment in time. And so we even see that with that relationship that he has with Jesus. But we see that in the relationship with the people in the Old Testament and even in the New Testament, which it seems so radical, but where folks have their own intent. They're going to do what they do, what I say every Sunday, I do what I want, and basically give God the spiritual finger, if I can put it that way. And there's no hope. That's when that happens. So toxic brokenness, hurtness, problems, issues will exist. But when somebody is seeking God, God promises, I'm going to send either the mature neighbor who understands this way, or God is going to reveal it either through the book of creation, through his design, or through the Bible, of course, our authority. So toxicity, I can say it, is not really the issue. It comes to that intent and then the willingness to truly humble yourself, and then get help.
So let me ask this. At the end of your message on Sunday, you had 3 questions that you challenged people to take a look at.
Yes.
Now, the first one of those, you said, was there a point in life where whiskey became the highest value in life? That's the first part of the question. Is that what you're talking about here, where your own intent, your own values, your own beliefs get in the way, and that's the whiskey in your life at that point?
Well, we're that substance, if you will, in this case, because you have 2 sides. You have a biological values, and then you have a psychological values, not to get too deep into that. But here, what I meant was, did this become the highest value or most important thing in your life to kill whatever may be toxic or painful, or these habits, no matter what? And it's simple the easier thing to do, the simple thing to do in the world system is to turn to that substance, or we can even say on the psychological side, turn to that psychological behavior, let's say like sex or pornography or whatever that might be. It's easy to turn that and kill the feelings, or to allow that to be your values, to really create meaning and significance in your life in that small temporary period of life. So that's where I was going with the whiskey. On the other hand, well, you didn't read the rest of that question, which is, if you remind me.
When you allowed the beer to chase your toxic emotions away.
Right, now we're speaking where another substance is, I'm having a bad day, my mood is completely out of whack. Rather than taking responsibility and creating your own mood, what you're doing is deciding to take a substance or whatever that might be, to actually kill the feelings that you have in yourself that turn into emotions in your mind, and then you're just doing the easy thing, and rather than celebrating with substances and the things that God has given us, you are using it as your highest value to deplete those issues, which is temporary, till the next morning, until we wake up going, oh, reality hits us in the face again, right?
Well, so correct me if I'm wrong. As I look at this question, let me read it in its entirety.
Okay.
Was there a point in life where whiskey, quote unquote, became the highest value in life, and you allowed the beer, quote unquote, to chase your toxic emotions away? Both of these really are suppressing those things that you don't want to face up to. It's just in a different way. One, with the whiskey, if you will, you're actually replacing those feelings with something else. And I'm going to go radical here on you.
Yeah.
Rather than the true relationship with Christ and with each other, replacing that with church tradition and polity and things like that. And then on the other side of it, the personal issues, trying to escape from those for just a short time in order to not have to face them.
Yeah, escape the world and have temporary pleasure in the flesh. And then, of course, rather than us living through the highest value of God, we then ourselves become really a little God, don't we? And we make the decision how to handle or manage, to be a steward of yourself, in a wrong or toxic way. And every time we decide to do it our way, we're truly not chasing anything away, really. We're just, like the word you're using, is suppressing those realities in our lives. And then, of course, we just get deeper and deeper. And if we continue in those ways, for the wages of sin is death, either spiritually, in self, or relationships, relationship with God, relationship with others. And if today in our society, our culture does not give evidence to that, I don't know what else will.
Right. Let's go to question number 2 that you posed on Sunday morning. And you touched on this a little bit ago, but I want to come back to it. The question was, at what point do we turn our face on a friend and allow God to be God?
Yeah. At what point, what moment Because really, when you look at that experience with God the Father and the Son, where God had to turn his back, it was only a moment in time. And so that when that hope is depleted and the person is just completely in their worldview, let's say, in the way they manage their life and in the way that they're not being responsible, the hope is gone, then you have to make that radical decision to kill the relationship. And easier said than done, I realize that. But at the same time, if we're going to live in the way God designed life to be, to live a pleasurable, a fulfilled life, pleasurable in the sense of happiness overall, and in a way that's going to lead to fulfillment, then we have to do it his way. And it's never easy, never said that, but it is simple if you think about it.
Interesting. Question number 3, and this is one that I've heard more than one person grab onto since your message on Sunday, and that is, are you a peacemaker or a people pleaser? Define the difference between those two.
Well, I tell you what, I'm going to go to my hero in this subject, Dr. Caroline Leaf. She is a pathologist. She's a Christian, and her whole movement and her cause is to truly understand some of these toxic things that happen. And so she reveals in her books and also in her blogs, Dr. Caroline Leaf, she actually gives a discussion towards this. And she says, it's natural to want people to like us. To kind of, let's bring a little bit of discernment between the two here. And no one wakes up wanting, and I'm going to read a little bit of her blog right here in front of me. No one wakes up wanting to be shunned or hated. But when does this natural longing turn us into a people pleaser, is her question. When does our desire to be loved turn toxic and make us do and say things that are not true? Now, this is so important to who we are, or the vision, that dream in our life, who we want to be. Two powerful questions she asks on her blog. The blog's titled People Pleasing, How It Can Damage Our Mental Health, our memory, our overall health. And she says this, because this is so powerful, she says it better than I can. When it comes to people pleasing, it is important to note that there is a difference between a people pleaser and a peacemaker. Now here it comes. A peacemaker wants to restore balance and reach a resolution. How critical is that, John, where we don't have a critical spirit, but we have a spirit of resolve? Yeah. And try to see the issue from all sides in a relational, and let me say this, objective way. And of course, that's exactly why I'm presenting this, because it's just not what I say. It truly is an objective discussion where we bring in our friends like Dr. Caroline Leaf to really understand this. We have to have that spirit of resolve and be objective. We cannot resolve our own problems in our own toxic ways. And so, this person, a people pleaser, if you will, has a desire to help others. So I'm going to ask our life groups to really hear that in this discussion. And they will sometimes be willing to say the truth, even if it hurts. And even if the people involved, your friends, do not want to face that reality.
That's the peacemaker?
That is the peacemaker.
Okay.
Now, now, on the other hand, a people pleaser is more self-focused and afraid of criticism. So think about our culture, right? This person tends to be hypersensitive to uncertainties and, let's say, conflict, and as a result will be more willing to sacrifice their values or mental health, for that matter, just to make someone else happy. Now, this of course creates that toxic feedback loop. This person, the people pleaser, seeks approval because of their low, can I use this word, self-confidence, but self-efficacy would be the proper term, which further lowers the value they place, first of all, on themselves, and will weaken their resolve to stand up to people in the future. And this can be quite, dangerous thinking about it, because sometimes people who pick up on this desire to please can be taken advantage of by other people that can give a backwards flip about them, making the people pleaser to say and do things that go against their integrity. And isn't that what we started this whole series with? Is the goal of our series for this year, that Life Rock On, is to be a complete Christian, to live with integrity. And so a big difference between a people pleaser, or should I start with peacemaker, versus the people pleaser.
The people pleaser, is that somewhat like what we would know of as being codependent?
It can be, yes. Okay. It can be in the sense of the conditioning of all of that. And what happens is, if we're now attached to someone and they actually become the idol in the relationship, rather than having that true relationship with God and being independent, let's say in their own values, their own purpose, their own dreams, because they're now shy. I don't know if that's the right word. Now, because they've been conditioned, they attach themselves to someone else rather than truly being that independent person that can truly, that God truly wants them to live out that wonderfully weird life individually with somebody else with purpose. And so, yeah, it's a complicated mess. And when it gets to that point where there's just people pleasing in the sense of now just it's in your subconscious memory, you just live that way, you don't even realize it. And then what happens is we're no longer with God. We might be with our neighbor or our partner or whoever that might be, but we're missing the way of God when that happens. With God, I should say.
And that's where it all comes right back to, is needs to start there and end there in the way of Jesus Christ.
Yeah. So the question then is, why is it important to learn how to be a people pleaser? Excuse me.
A peacemaker.
How not to be. Yeah. Hey, what I meant to say, why it is so important to learn how not. Let me get that right. Not to be a people pleaser. So when you are focused on pleasing people, let's say, you can end up sacrificing, let me say, self-identity, your own morals, your values, and your mental health. Isn't the great commandment, love God with all of your mind? And I think the church has lost focus here because they want to pick on the world a little bit in the psychology. But folks, let's never forget that we are to love God with all of our mind. And that's why we're having so many and this will be subjective at this point, but my understanding, my reasoning, and my own thought process is the reason we have so many mental disorders is because we've walked away from this peacemaking ability, and we've now, most of us have become people pleasers. And so how critical is this to get us back on track as a Christian, as a married couple, as a family in that way of Jesus Christ, and as a church to truly create a movement that's going to be meaningful in the sense of really curing the issues, the health issues, mental issues that are happening in our culture today, especially in the West.
Well, there is so much more that we could get into, but I think maybe you've given folks plenty to chew on for a week, and but of course, as always, Drake, I know that if folks have questions, you're more than willing to answer those and
yes,
visit with them about specific questions.
Absolutely. Our entire elder staff is willing to do that. And of course, isn't that what it's all about, where we're connecting and you know something that I don't know. And so when people need help, rather than giving our opinions, hopefully through that objective knowledge and that proper attitude, that's kindness and curiosity, we can help each other to truly live let me say it again, a wonderfully weird life And Wonderfully Weird just represents the holiness of God, the uniqueness of God, and the goodness of God as individuals together, and even as a system in the sense of the church, a living organism, if you will.
Well, it's been a very fun and interesting first episode of the Wonderfully Weird Living podcast, and I appreciate so much your time and your insight as you explained to us what you were talking about on Sunday. And I look forward to this coming Sunday's message as you continue to build on those themes.
Yes.
They're standalone themes, but they also build upon each other as you go through the year.
Don't Stop Believing is the song by Journey next week, and then I'll be uncovering, and I have a message, I'm going to deliver a message titled Street Light People, which is a term that I took out of the song to really understand what it means to walk in and out of the light when you're walking down a boulevard. And many Christians live in that way where they just expect that rather than the They live in a streetlight mentality rather than a spotlight mentality, or that spotlight being the light of God, just so focused on your life. So I'm looking forward to really delivering that message on Sunday.
All right, well, that's episode number 1 of the Wonderfully Weird Living podcast, and I want to thank Drake so much once again. Thank you, sir, and we'll visit again next week. Find out more about your uniqueness when you get your own copy of Drake's book, Wonderfully Weird, available in the fall of 2019. And please email us with your questions or comments at wonderfullyweirdliving@gmail.com. Join us again next time as we continue to explore Wonderfully Weird Living. I'm John Waters. Thank you for joining us.